Jericho was once an ancient city of awe-inspiring power and enduring renown. Its denizens, firmly convinced of their own invulnerability, dwelled within seemingly impregnable ramparts that soared high into the sky. These massive fortifications, erected in an age when enormous walls were seen as the ultimate symbol of defense, shielded a community immersed in both extraordinary wealth and extravagant pleasure. The citizens of Jericho immersed themselves in a lifestyle marked by sumptuous riches and unabashed indulgences. Yet, hidden behind the glitter of luxury, lay a society that had forsaken virtue for rampant idolatry, deep-seated corruption, and a moral decay that permeated every corner of its existence. From time immemorial, Jericho staked its claim as a bastion of prosperity, a place so ancient that many believe its origins reach back to the very dawn of human civilization. Historians and ancient texts alike claim that this city was not merely a temporary haven in the harsh desert, but a formidable urban center that emerged as mankind's first deliberate attempt at creating permanence. Its inhabitants took immense pride in their seemingly eternal safety, bolstered by the idea that nothing could ever overcome the colossal stone walls that encapsulated them. Within these walls, lavish markets, exotic bazaars, and resplendent dwellings testified to both human ingenuity and the allure of material success. But within this dazzling veneer, a darker reality was at work. Jericho was renowned for hosting ritualistic ceremonies in its sacred temples, rites performed in honor of numerous pagan deities. In these hallowed spaces, sexual rites and acts of debauchery were carried out as sacred offerings. Men and women alike willingly surrendered to sin, all in the name of gods they believed could ensure earthly prosperity. Such ceremonies, far removed from moral rectitude, were celebrated with an almost festive lack of restraint. The people took no heed of the consequences, buoyed by a false sense of everlasting security. To them, the towering walls were not merely a physical boundary, but an emblem of divine favor, a guarantee that no external force or internal sin could ever bring them harm. It is precisely this bewildering blend of prosperity and depravity that has made Jericho such an enduring subject of fascination and cautionary legend. One may ask, how could a city so splendiferous and seemingly fortified fall so inexplicably from grace? What precisely transpired behind those impregnable barricades that ultimately led to its collapse? And even more pressing, does the tale of Jericho offer a warning that resonates with modern society? A message that transcends millennia and calls into question the very nature of security, wealth, and morality. In the earliest days of civilization, within the stretch known as the Fertile Crescent, a land blessed by abundant water and nourishing soil, Jericho emerged as a pioneering center. Here, when other tribes wandered in search of sustenance day after day, the inhabitants of Jericho discovered how to harness the generous bounty of the earth. A natural spring of fresh water, a rare gem amid the arid desert, sustained the community. This vital resource spurred innovation in agriculture, enabling the cultivation of grains, dates, and other produce that would feed its ever-growing population. Over time, the city blossomed into not only an agricultural powerhouse, but also a significant trading hub. Merchants and travelers from distant lands flocked to its markets where spices, finely woven fabrics, precious metals, and exquisitely crafted artifacts changed hands, a commerce that both enriched Jericho and further bolstered its reputation as a center of civilization. Yet with prosperity came complacency. The very opulence that elevated Jericho as a wonder of early urban achievement served as the backdrop against which its moral disintegration unfolded. The citizens, intoxicated by the glitter of luxury, began to neglect the spiritual and ethical principles that once marked early communities. Their admiration for physical grandeur soon crossed over into a misguided veneration of earthly pleasure, the kind of pleasure that, when pursued without restraint, leads inevitably to decay. Envision living within those high stone walls, surrounded at every turn by wealth and sumptuous excess. One might be tempted to believe that the laws of nature and fate had little to do with the affairs of such a prosperous group. After all, when one is encircled by great stones built to repel invaders and shield against the harsh elements, who could imagine that calamity might ever find a way in? In a twist of dramatic irony, the very defiance and haughtiness born from their newfound grandeur obscured a fatal vulnerability. Deep within the heart of Jericho, the relentless pursuit of pleasure and the abandonment of pious traditions had sown the seeds of its downfall. The city, once a beacon of human achievement and divine blessing, had strayed far from the path of righteousness. Its towering walls, emblems of strength and protection, did nothing to stave off the corruption festering within. While the inhabitants reveled in their endless luxury, they also descended into practices that, from an eternal perspective, were nothing short of sacrilege. According to sacred scripture, specifically the narrative recounted in the book of Joshua, Jericho's fate was sealed not by mortal armies or conventional warfare, but by a divine mandate. The Bible relates how God, displeased with the unbridled immorality and sacrilegious conduct that had become the lifeblood of this illustrious city, declared that its end was nigh. He spoke to Joshua, commanding him with the astonishing promise, "Behold, I have delivered Jericho, along with its king and its valiant soldiers, into your hands." The sheer audacity of this promise seemed to contradict all human logic. How could a fortified city with walls so vast and seemingly impenetrable be laid waste without the clamor of battle or the force of armies? Indeed, as unsettling as it may seem, the story of Jericho encapsulates a timeless paradox. On one hand, it is a celebration of human resourcefulness, of early urban planning, agricultural innovation, and the capacity to build monumental structures. On the other hand, it stands as a grim admonition when human pride blinds us and we allow indulgence to override discipline. Even the mightiest defenses may prove futile. The walls of Jericho, which once towered as monuments to the city's strength, eventually crumbled in a manner that defied both architectural prediction and military might. The very faith that its residents had placed in stone and mortar was shattered in an instant, leaving behind only ruins as testimony to the impermanence of human constructs built on error and excess. It is precisely this dramatic collapse, so sudden and unequivocal, that invites us to reflect on the larger implications of pride, corruption, and the abandonment of faith. The rejection of divine order in favor of instant gratification ultimately rendered the city vulnerable to forces beyond its control. The story of Jericho is more than a historical account or a biblical parable. It is a cautionary tale that reverberates through the ages. It calls on us to ask ourselves whether the material security we celebrate today might be based on foundations as unstable as those overturned in ancient times. Could we too be building our lives within invisible walls that may one day crumble under the weight of our misdeeds? As we consider these questions, the legacy of Jericho emerges not just as an archaeological or theological curiosity, but as a mirror held up to our own contemporary society, a society that in many respects clings to the assurance that wealth, technology, and human ingenuity can immunize us against all calamity. And yet, history reminds us that even the most formidable fortifications, when constructed atop a foundation of moral decay, are doomed to fail. The fate of Jericho serves as a stark warning. No amount of wealth or human achievement can shield us indefinitely from the consequences of a life lived apart from the higher principles and values that bring enduring security. In this opening exploration of Jericho's story, we see a city that was both a marvel of civilization and a byword for spiritual decline. Its walls, built to last for eternity, ultimately became the stage upon which divine justice was enacted. A tragedy that underscores the eternal truth that when we forsake righteousness in exchange for the fleeting pleasure of material indulgence, no fortress can ever safeguard us against the eventual reckoning. Building upon the ancient legacy introduced, we now turn our attention to the unique features that set Jericho apart as one of the earliest exemplars of urban civilization, and yet, paradoxically, as a center of moral decay. Far more than a random collection of dwellings or an incipient settlement, Jericho distinguished itself through its innovative exploitation of natural resources and its pioneering contributions to architecture, trade, and agricultural enterprise. At its heart lay a precious gift, a constant life-sustaining spring of fresh water. In the unforgiving context of a desert, this water was nothing short of miraculous. It transformed a seemingly barren locale into a fertile oasis and became the cornerstone upon which Jericho's prosperity was built. With access to vital water, early settlers learned to cultivate the land. They developed methods to plant, harvest, and store staples like wheat, barley, and date palms, a practice that rapidly evolved into complex forms of agriculture. This agricultural boom not only ensured food security, but also afforded the city an economic stability that attracted neighboring peoples and merchants from faraway lands. Jericho grew into a vibrant crossroads of trade, where precious commodities, spices, textiles, and precious metals flowed freely, exchanged by those keen to benefit from the city's strategic location in the Jordan Valley. As commerce flourished, so too did the city's splendor. Merchants built bustling markets amid bustling streets, where the scent of exotic spices mingled with the sound of animated bartering. Lavish mansions and palatial dwellings popped up everywhere, adorned with intricate carvings, gilded decorations, and elaborate tapestries that celebrated wealth and aristocratic lineage. Yet this outward display of opulence was double-edged. The same prosperity that allowed Jericho to shine as a jewel of early civilization also provided fertile ground for the seeds of decadence to take root. Inside the impressive temples of Jericho, a series of sanctuaries dedicated to a myriad of pagan deities, the celebrations of excess took on a ritualistic form. These temples were not solemn places of worship in the manner of later monotheistic traditions. Rather, they were arenas of erotic and sometimes brutal ceremonies designed to appease capricious gods. In these rites, sexual rituals and even acts of human sacrifice were considered expressions of piety. The very foundation of religious life in Jericho was thus intertwined with practices that from a modern moral perspective appear both depraved and shocking. Idol worship, far from being a mere cultural quirk, became a central tenet of daily existence, a belief system that justified every indulgence and every act of debauchery. Such practices had a cascading impact on all layers of Jericho's society. The corruption was not confined merely to the clergy or the ruling elite. It reached deep into the private lives of ordinary citizens. Families were sometimes arranged, not by considerations of love or mutual respect, but as transactions that would secure economic or political advantage. Personal honor was sacrificed at the altar of convenience and excess. In public squares and private quarters alike, the pursuit of pleasure supplanted the pursuit of wisdom. The community's collective moral compass was gradually replaced by a compulsion to seek immediate gratification, a trend that grew in tandem with the city's material abundance. Ironically, within these circumstances, there also emerged a culture of ostentatious security. with its double-layered defensive walls, one massive stone barrier standing roughly 5 meters tall, and an even more imposing earthen or adobe structure. Rising an additional 7 meters, the physical fortifications of Jericho were engineered to inspire both admiration and hubris. These fortifications were not random. They were strategically constructed on a natural elevated ground, which rendered them even more impregnable to enemy assaults. In addition to their sheer size, the walls were equipped with reinforced gates, towering watchtowers, and secret passages designed for rapid defense. Such meticulous planning in architecture and military strategy had given the city an enduring reputation as a nearly unassailable fortress. The citizens took great pride in their accomplished engineering feat. They believed that their expansive, multi-layered fortifications, combined with resources like ample stores of grain and water, would allow them to withstand sieges that might last for months or even years. It was a faith so deep that when ominous signs began to appear on the horizon, whispers of an approaching foreign force, the people of Jericho were confident that their storied walls would protect them from all harm. Yet, just as the finest architectural structures can hide imperfections in their foundation, so too could Jericho's physical defenses belie an inner vulnerability. Despite its outward magnificence, the city had become so deeply mired in excess that it had, in effect, separated itself from the benevolent order of things. Historical and biblical records later reveal that all the wealth, fortifications, and opulent celebrations were ineffective in staving off a destiny that had been divinely preordained. The very virtues that once made Jericho an emblem of early human achievement were overwhelmed by the vices that the citizens had allowed to flourish unchecked. As if echoing an inevitable cosmic rebuke, the sacred texts remind us that the prosperity of Jericho was inextricably linked with moral peril. For every market stall brimming with riches, there was a temple where forbidden rites were enacted with zealous abandon. The citizens believed that through the power of their gods, they could secure bountiful harvests, ensure victory in battle, and enjoy endless hedonistic pursuits. Their unwavering faith in these false idols created a false sense of security, a belief that if one could accumulate enough wealth or erect unyielding walls, one would be immune to calamity. Such was the seductive nature of material success. It provided temporary solace and pride, yet it could not substitute for the higher, sustaining force of righteousness. The story of Jericho's prosperity, therefore, embodies a tragic irony. Here was a city that had achieved miraculous feats in agriculture, trade, and engineering, a city that seemed destined to prosper for eternity. And yet, its ecstatic celebration of transient pleasures and its abandonment of divine principles ultimately prepared the stage for what was to come. The disregard shown for spiritual discipline and the neglect of a proper moral framework set in motion a chain of events that would lead to the city's dramatic and inescapable downfall. Every act of excess, every indulgence in idolatry, slowly eroded the spiritual armor that might have otherwise protected the community from impending judgment. In comparing Jericho's splendor with its eventual fate, one cannot help but be struck by the message it carries for every generation. The city's architects and rulers constructed monumental walls in an effort to establish a legacy of invincibility. But the true strength of any society does not reside solely in its physical infrastructure. It is measured by the integrity, humility, and moral fortitude of its people. When those qualities are supplanted by vanity and indulgence, even the grandest defenses become vulnerable. The tale of Jericho serves as a timeless parable, a stark reminder that while human effort can yield breathtaking accomplishments, it is ultimately the spirit and the heart that determine whether a civilization will flourish or fall. As the narrative of Jericho unfolds further, we arrive at the dramatic climax that reshaped history and revealed the limitations of human pride in the face of divine judgment. In the biblical account recounted in the book of Joshua, the siege of Jericho is presented not as a conventional military encounter, but as an unparalleled act of miraculous intervention, a demonstration that no earthly fortress, however mightily constructed, can thwart the will of God. For 6 consecutive days, the Israelite army, led by the steadfast Joshua, proceeded around the fortified city without engaging in direct combat. Under the guidance of divine instruction, the troops marched in a solemn procession, their footsteps echoing along the sandy perimeter as they encircled Jericho. Accompanying them were priests carrying trumpets, whose piercing sounds cut through the quiet dawn, imbuing the air with an eerie, anticipatory rhythm. This unusual method of siege, marked by stealth, perseverance, and an unyielding faith, was designed not to battle through the walls, but to invoke a profound act of obedience and divine power. Imagine for a moment the scene as the events unfolded. The inhabitants of Jericho, secure in the knowledge that their walls were impregnable, witnessed an endless, almost hypnotic procession of enemy soldiers and clergy circling the city. There were no violent clashes, no battering rams crashing against stone. Instead, there was a solemn procession, punctuated only by the resonant blast of trumpets and the measured pace of devoted warriors. The people of Jericho, wrapped in their aura of confidence and self-assured magnificence, failed to perceive the warning signs hidden within the ritualistic march. Their hearts were filled with a misplaced trust in physical might and material wealth, a trust that would soon be shattered. On the 7th day, as the early morning light began to disperse the residual darkness, the ritual reached its crescendo. The Israelites made a final decisive circuit of the city, this time completing 7 complete rounds. Then at the moment their priests sounded a mighty blast, a call both triumphant and commanding. Joshua shouted to the assembled people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." In that fateful instant, the unthinkable occurred. The great walls of Jericho, long considered the epitome of fortification and human achievement, began to crumble as if by the sheer force of divine command. With no human weapon striking them, these majestic ramparts collapsed into rubble, their destruction instantaneous and total. Scholars and historians have long debated the possible causes underlying this sudden collapse. Some propose that the construction methods might have left the walls vulnerable to subtle structural faults, perhaps built on an unstable foundation or subject to natural weaknesses that no man could have foreseen. Others speculate that an earthquake, common to the geologically active Jordan Valley, might have contributed to the catastrophic failure of the city's defenses at that precise moment of divine orchestration. Still, for the faithful, such theories pale in comparison to the overwhelming narrative of miraculous intervention. The fall of Jericho is interpreted as a powerful symbol that no matter how formidable human constructs may appear, they are ultimately subservient to the will of a higher power. This extraordinary event served multiple purposes. It was not simply a tactical victory for the Israelites. It was a resounding demonstration that the divine will cannot be thwarted by the might of worldly empires. The collapse echoed throughout the ancient Near East as a testament that when a community becomes entrenched in corruption and forsakes moral values, physical defenses become meaningless in the face of divine judgment. The message was as clear as it was chilling. Human pride and self-reliance, no matter how awe-inspiring their manifestations, are nothing compared to the authority of the Almighty. As the people of Jericho watched in disbelief the ruin of their once immortal walls, a palpable sense of dread and despair took over. The very foundations upon which they had built their lives, both literal and metaphorical, were disintegrating before their eyes, and with it, the certainty that had long sustained their arrogance. Had they not placed their trust in fleeting, human achievements? Had they not, in their pursuit of pleasure and wealth, turned their backs on the divine counsel that might have preserved them? These are the questions that the fall of Jericho compels us to ask, even in our modern day. Are we in danger of constructing invisible fortresses built on the shifting sands of materialism and moral compromise? In many ways, the siege of Jericho remains a powerful allegory for the cyclical nature of human hubris. The miraculous collapse of those grand walls underscores a universal truth. No fortress, be it physical, economic, or spiritual, can remain impervious if its foundation is compromised by corruption and a neglect of higher ideals. The lesson is as urgent today as it was in ancient times. For those who pride themselves on the strength of their achievements without regard to the moral underpinnings that sustain them, history stands as a stern admonition that all that glitters may be doomed to fall. Turning now to one of the most stirring and human aspects of Jericho's narrative, the role of women and the extraordinary story of a woman named Rahab, we uncover another layer of complexity in a city defined by contrasts. Amid the widespread depravity and scandalous religious practices, the fate of Jericho's female population mirrored the broader moral and social decay of the time. In a society that publicly celebrated excess and indulgence, women were often relegated to roles defined by submission and exploitation. For many, their lives were dictated not by personal choice, but by the dictates of tradition, political maneuvering, or the ruthless demands of religious ritual. In Jericho, as in many ancient societies, a duality existed concerning the status of women. On one side, women affiliated with the elite, those connected to the ruling classes or influential merchants, occasionally enjoyed a measure of respect, and were even capable of wielding some degree of authority in matters of commerce and social ritual. However, such exceptions were a minority. For the vast majority of ordinary women, life was marked by being treated as little more than commodities. Their fates were often sealed through arranged marriages, transactional alliances, or, more shockingly, by being forced into roles as sacred prostitutes within pagan temples. In these hallowed yet profane settings, acts of sexual intercourse were not expressions of intimacy or love, but were ritualized displays intended to curry favor with capricious deities, gods believed to control the fertility of the land and the prosperity of its crops. This practice, commonly referred to as sacred prostitution, was rationalized by the notion that the fertility of the soil and the well-being of the community were inextricably linked with human sexuality. The women consigned to these rituals were expected to engage in sexual relations as acts of worship meant to invoke divine blessings such as abundant harvests, protection in battle, and overall prosperity. These practices, steeped in the cultural and religious ethos of the time, were not universally condemned by the people of Jericho. Rather, they were woven into the fabric of everyday life. In the eyes of many, these rituals represented the logical extension of a culture that placed material gratification and hedonistic fervor above the pursuit of higher spiritual truth. Yet amid this pervasive culture of licentiousness, one story stands out as a beacon of transformation and redemption, that of Rahab. Unlike her compatriots, who had largely succumbed to the morally corrosive atmosphere of their environment, Rahab was a woman whose life took an unexpected turn. Known to the locals simply as a prostitute, she occupied a lowly position by the standards of her society. But in a twist of fate that would forever alter her destiny, Rahab recognized the looming judgment upon Jericho. Having heard whispers of the mighty deeds of the God of Israel and the impending arrival of Israelite spies sent by Joshua, she chose not to remain complicit in the city's collective sin. Instead, driven by a spark of true faith, Rahab defied the prevailing culture. She risked her life by sheltering the Israeli scouts and urging them to return to her with assurances of safe passage, not only to protect her own family, but to align herself with a higher moral calling. Her courageous act of faith, a solitary stand amid widespread corruption, did not go unnoticed. In the ensuing capture of Jericho and the dramatic collapse of its walls, the Israelites remembered Rahab's assistance. As a token of divine mercy, and because of her genuine belief in the true God, she and her family were spared from the city's destruction. Rahab's story, then, operates as a potent reminder that even in the darkest of times, when a city is overwhelmed by decadence and moral decay, a sincere turn toward righteousness can change the course of one's destiny. In a society where women were often used as mere pawns in the quest for profit and pleasure, Rahab emerged as a symbol of hope and redemption. Her legacy challenges us to look beyond surface appearances and to acknowledge that genuine faith and transformation are accessible to all, regardless of social status or past transgressions. Moreover, the tale of Rahab invites a broader reflection on the nature of divine justice. While the overwhelming corruption in Jericho led to its ultimate ruin, the selective mercy shown to Rahab underscores a recurring theme in sacred history, that God's compassion is both discerning and transformative. The narrative of Jericho, when examined through the lens of Rahab's redemption, becomes not just a story of downfall, but also one of the possibility of renewal. Even amid widespread moral collapse, there exists the hope that individual choices grounded in faith can pave the way for salvation. This message resonates powerfully in our modern era as we grapple with issues of social injustice, the exploitation of vulnerable groups, and the consequences of unchecked indulgence in worldly pleasures. Beyond the personal story of Rahab, the collapse of Jericho itself stands as an enduring metaphor for the eventual crumbling of all fortifications, be they physical walls or the metaphorical walls we build around our lives through sin and moral compromise. The miraculous fall of Jericho's walls sends a resounding message. No matter how formidable an external structure might seem, when it is supported only by human arrogance and corrupted values, it is doomed to collapse under the weight of its own iniquity. Such is the cautionary tale that Jericho imparts to each generation. It calls on us to scrutinize the walls we erect in our own lives, the barriers formed by fear, pride, doubt, or sin, and to recognize that true strength lies not in material security, but in living a life aligned with higher, immutable principles. In closing, the saga of Jericho combines elements of wonder, tragedy, and redemption. Its imposing walls and bustling markets, its sumptuous feasts alongside depraved rituals, and its ultimate destruction at the hands of a divine power all weave a tapestry that has captivated hearts and minds for millennia. Whether viewed as a historical account, a theological lesson, or a timeless parable, Jericho demands that we confront the consequences of a life devoted solely to earthly pleasures. It challenges each of us to ask, how many fortresses have we built in our own lives? What moral or spiritual walls stand in the way of true, lasting security? And, most importantly, can we, like Rahab, choose a different path when faced with the inevitable judgment that comes from abandoning that which is truly eternal? If you believe that the Almighty offers true refuge, if you claim that your strength is not derived from transient worldly achievements, but from a steadfast commitment to higher, eternal principles, then declare it boldly. Embrace the lesson of Jericho and let it remind you that while human constructs may crumble, a life built on genuine faith, repentance, and moral integrity stands strong against the ravages of time and fate.